and his son has taken over, and he has not been able to demonstrate that he is really in charge. So there's a leadership vacuum for sure, and it's being filled by the IRGC leadership.
Trump says he's in no rush, posting in part, "I read the fake news saying I'm under pressure to make a deal. This is not true. Time is not my adversary. We're in it, and it will be done right."
So let's check in on the Strait of Hormuz and Iran, because when we last reported to you, the Iranian foreign minister had publicly stated in his words that the Strait of Hormuz was, quote, completely open. He was thanking President Trump for brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and it seemed like we were trending in a very positive direction towards a deal. As a matter of fact, those negotiations were set to take place today in Pakistan. Yet, some 24 hours later on Saturday, all of a sudden, the IRGC came out and stated the opposite. They said, no, the strait is once again closed. They allegedly fired on at least 2 oil tankers and have suddenly canceled those very negotiations, which really makes you ask the question, what exactly is going on here? Well, I think we should be clear. This is not magically suddenly happening now simply because Iran has gained a bunch of leverage, right? It wasn't the case in the span of some 24 hours that they didn't have the cards before, yet nothing happened. Suddenly Iran was weak, now they're strong. Rather, I would argue what you are watching is a government that is completely fracturing on itself. It's not a position of strength. Rather, it is infighting that is taking place. As a matter of fact, since the beginning of this conflict, we have been speculating that there are effectively 2 Iranian governments. There are the hardliners who want to fight on the war to the very bitter end. Typically, this is more so the leadership of the military branches, right? The IRGC, they're more ideological. And then you have the political class of the government. This includes people like the president, the foreign minister, the parliament, the bureaucrats, the people who have to answer to things like the economy, the government budget. They're much more practical because they understand that the Iranian economy, and by the way, society, given they've already faced economic protests fairly recently, cannot really hold on or sustain this very long. And so all along, it has indeed been a power struggle between the negotiators and the IRGC. What appears to be happening right now is the military seems like they're almost trying to coup the political branch of the government. As a matter of fact, it's worth noting, we haven't even heard from the Iranian foreign minister ever since he claimed the Strait of Hormuz was open. Is he alive? Did they assassinate him? Is he allegedly on house arrest, as some have reported? Frankly, we have absolutely no idea, but I do want to sort of delve into this situation, try to understand it for you here today, and make it, again, very clear, this is not coming from a position of strength, but certainly it does undermine the ability to make a deal, which is exactly why President Trump has basically come out and said, based on the fact that we don't know who is actually in charge of Iran, and it's almost like watching these children vie for power against each other. It's very immature, especially apparently nobody can reach the supreme leader to actually get approval for anything. And there's one guy who does have access, allegedly, if the guy's even alive, and he's saying, haha, I have the access. No, you can't talk to him. You can't talk to him. And the government's in a complete mess right now. Let's talk about it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And again, so Friday, Aragachi, the Iranian foreign minister, one of the guys that the U.S. was chiefly negotiating with thus far, comes out and says the strait is completely open. Seems like things are trending in a very positive direction. On Saturday, the IRGC in particular, the Revolutionary Guard, comes out then and said the Strait of Hormuz is now back to their previous state, saying that it will remain under strict IRGC control following the ceasefire and will remain so until the U.S. lifts its blockade. Allegedly, these are reports, but it seems to actually line up with the real events. I don't think it's exactly speculation. The IRGC appear to be furious after Foreign Minister Aragachi announced the opening of the Strait of Hormuz without discussing it with them. Oh, so you notice some things are going on here. And if you followed our coverage throughout Epic Fury, you would know this was not the first time this happened. As a matter of fact, just about 2 weeks in the war, you may remember when the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, again, this is the political branch of the government. These guys are more moderate. They're more pragmatists. Came out and issued an apology to the Gulf states saying, we didn't mean to attack you. It was a miscommunication issue. Please don't be mad at us. Please don't drag yourselves into the war. Hours later, the IRGC basically comes out and says, shut the heck up publicly. They said, shut up, don't listen to him. He has no authority over this. We're going to keep on attacking the Gulf states. And then allegedly, Pezeshkian, the president, was trying to resign. The IRGC wouldn't let him because he could not submit his resignation to the president. A lot of chaos here, folks, going on. And, you know, I'll explain in a little bit later in the video what this actually means for the United States. But first, I want you to just understand these details. We do believe at least one or two Indian oil tankers over the weekend were attacked by the IRGC. They claim that they paid the proper tolls to Iran, which they're not supposed to be doing anyway. But nonetheless, the Indians here thought they did it. And then the IRGC claimed they did not pay the tolls. Nobody really knows. But long story short, what happened, the Iranians are firing upon commercial shipping, which is once again bringing oil shipping to a halt in the region.
Sepa Navy. This is Motorengafsan Marhedal. You gave me clearance to go. My name second on your list. You gave me clearance to go. You are fighting now. Let me turn back.
Now, to be completely honest, just listening to that audio, I have no idea who actually paid the toll, because it's like listening to two scammers argue with one another, which, you know, maybe there's some truth in that. Nonetheless, you notice the Iranian strategy here. So they're mad about the American blockade on their oil and their shipping, and they respond by shooting at an Indian oil tanker that was transporting oil from Iraq. You may be asking, what does that have to do with the conflict itself? Iraq's not even really considered one of the Gulf nations that Iran is typically at war or conflict with. What is going on here? What is the point of this? Well, I don't know if you've noticed by now, but despite Iran's claims that they actually really do control the Strait of Hormuz, you notice how their only ability to do anything is basically just piracy or terrorism, right? Oh, we shot at some oil tankers that don't even belong to the belligerents of this conflict. Oh, wow, we're so tough. We're so big and bad. Have you done anything to actually break the American blockade? Have you made any meaningful resistance against that? By the way, have you actually showed on any serious level that you really do control the strait, or are you just scaring a bunch of companies for insurance purposes, really, and nothing much more, right? It's almost to a degree quite pathetic that the only thing you can resort to is cheap terrorism, right? What happened to the naval mines that Iran supposedly dropped at the bottom of the ocean? What happened to the mightiest navy of all Middle Eastern countries? Well, guess what's happened to that? It's now sitting at the bottom of the ocean. So keep that in mind as you watch this. You know, I wouldn't be surprised in the span of a couple of weeks if Iran once again is forced to admit to relinquishing control that they don't really have over the Strait of Hormuz. But nonetheless, this is the current situation where allegedly India is furious after Iran gunboats fired on some Indian-flagged oil tankers that are basically saying, what the heck did we have to do with this? Well, at the same time, though, you should also ask the question, well, maybe you shouldn't have been trying to pay tolls to the Iranians. America told you that was illegal. We would not recognize it. You should not do that. But, you know, here you go.
We are extremely disturbed by the attacks that took place on merchant mariners. We have also maintained very, very clearly that international waterways must remain free and open.
So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what attacking third non-belligerent countries is supposed to really achieve for Iran diplomatically. I also doubt whether acting like effectively Somali pirates means you actually do control the Strait of Hormuz, but you can make a strong argument. The whole point here was simply to make a point, right? It was just to make this public statement that, hey, the foreign minister, the president, they're not really in charge of the country. The IRGC is seizing back control. And no, we don't want your deal. We don't want your diplomacy with the United States, right? I would argue that's really what's going on. So should the Iranian threat level be taken all that seriously in Hormuz? Well, so long as they're behaving like the Captain Phillips guy, I'm not really sure, but I guess it's enough to scare, again, for insurance purposes more than anything else, a lot of those oil tankers from moving once again. So, it is an issue for sure. It's something that has to be resolved. At the same time, let's be honest, I don't think that they suddenly grew a navy over the span of 24 hours. Rather that, again, the IRGC is trying to make a point here, and now this is a power struggle happening within the government, and that's what we should really understand what is going on. So even as it pertains to our initial reporting that everyone was running with on Friday, right? The Strait of Hormuz is completely open. Iran said that. I would say that's still true in the sense that one branch of the Iranian government said that. The other, however, is furious about that, and now who knows what's about to happen. Military coup, civil war, a quieter power struggle. Nonetheless, it's a powder keg. It's a very volatile situation at the moment, and you see more signs of that because this Wednesday, exactly today, as a matter of fact, the American delegation was set to meet with the Iranian delegation. If you watch the events in the prior week, it seemed like it was going quite well, right? They were inching closer toward a deal. All of a sudden, as of yesterday and today, Iran has officially canceled that meeting. They are not showing up. Nobody knows where those negotiators are, by the way. Who knows what the IRGC actually did to them? But it is a very questionable situation, right? So you're seeing this total 180. As a matter of fact, even further, likely astroturfed by the regime or by the IRGC themselves. State media began to report on a allegedly spontaneous rally. Yeah, totally organic, right? Outside of the foreign ministry, were alleged quote-unquote students, which is interesting because I see a bunch of women in the burqa and the whatnot, the hijab dressed there that I thought weren't allowed to study at that age, but okay, nonetheless. And they're demanding transparency on the Hormuz negotiations and clarification of macro decisions. In other words, doing the IRGC's bidding. I'm sure this is totally organic and normal, but it's very interesting, right? That the IRGC would send likely fake AstroTurf protesters to Aragachi and to Pezeshkian's offices to protest against them, right? Something odd here is definitely going on.
With the regime having been shattered and the command and control, the unity of command being really devastated, you see these factions now coming to the surface in Iran, where the IRGC is openly ridiculing the foreign ministry, calling them out, calling them names. Another aspect of this as well, the IRGC, those extreme commanders have so abused the Iranian people since 1979. If they begin to lose control of the situation, if we don't kill them with bombs and missiles, their own people are going to drag them out into the streets.
Yep, and this is exactly what we were speculating on from the beginning. There are two Iranian governments. That's why you sometimes see the flip-flopping. Remember, early in the conflict, one side would say they negotiated with America, the other side would deny that that happened, and then they would communicate and then say it did happen. This whole back and forth mess. Why? Because there are two Iranian governments. Although at this point, I don't think it's speculation anymore. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to understand 100% that is just indeed what is actually happening. And it does, to an extent, undermine the argument that Trump didn't affect regime change here, because you're watching regime change happen in real time. Now, who ends up inheriting the regime is still a question, right? This is something that we have to control, we have to monitor. This is the moment where you really need the CIA and intelligence agencies to obviously be involved here and doing their things. That's very key, but it's something to keep an eye on. At the same time, it also does raise the question as to whether you can make a deal in the immediate future under these circumstances. Which side of the Iranian government are you trying to make a deal with? The IRGC, who claims they control the strait, the foreign ministry, who thus far in the past week over the negotiations completely relinquished control of the strait? We have no actual clue, which is why President Trump came out this week and said the following. Based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come with a unified proposal. Basically, Trump here is saying, get your act together, and then we can talk, right? But until then, very important, the blockade continues. So come to us, figure out who's in charge, but until then, we're still blockading you. We're still suffocating you via the economic and financial pressure, so on and so forth. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such a time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other from President Trump. So he's effectively saying we're going to continue the ceasefire indefinitely. The conflict is not going to get hot per se unless Iran does that. But at the same time, the blockade's going to continue. We're going to continue to effectively starve out really both sides of this regime, right? Because both branches of the government still make money, still profit off of the corruption and kickbacks from the oil shipping from the Strait of Hormuz. That's not going anywhere, but for the time being, we're going to basically sit back and stand by. Which, again, I don't think just means we're literally just going to let whatever happens in Iran happen. Probably more so means now it's not the time for the military. Now's the time for the CIA to try to push one side into power over the other, right? That's obviously the case. And here's the thing, I will point out, I think when you look at the current situation, some people might say, no, bomb them now. No, I actually think this is the smart strategy. Because when you have a power struggle going on, okay, and sometimes that house of cards, the entire thing might collapse on itself, who knows? The last thing you want to do, right now we're dividing and conquering effectively. The last thing you would want to do right now is unify the Iranian government and the Iranian people by giving them a common enemy, right? Because you saw that during wartime. I pointed out this government has always been fractured from the beginning. Because when we took out the top leaders, there's a power vacuum. People are fighting for power. But when you're in the crisis of war and you're all unifying, you know, those cracks don't show as much. Notice how it only took a couple of weeks into the ceasefire, as we pointed out, as we predicted, for this thing to start to come undone, for the branches of the government to literally start fighting each other, right? So that's the time when you want to be influencing it, right? You want to be pulling the puppet strings, but maybe you also want a degree to keep kind of like fanning the flames of the political collapse, if that makes sense, right? That's actually the smart thing to be doing. And at the same time, make sure that the naval blockade continues so that way the economic pressure can continue for this regime, right? We can try to speed run that political collapse. As we explained in our prior videos, this regime, it's possible, can't even survive more than a few months if they're no longer making their oil profits, right? They can't fund the government. Their people who already have been protesting over economic reasons likely could do so as well. Who knows if even the military or the police or the IRGC even, what do they start doing once, they're not getting paid either, as the prior guy on Fox speculated, and it is possible, yeah, the people probably don't like the IRGC all that much. There's probably the most resented faction of the Iranian government. What happens if they start to also lose control in the country? So is it concerning on some level that the IRGC is trying to tighten its grip on power? Yes, absolutely. I would point out, however, at the same time, it does seem obvious they're doing so out of desperation, more so than strength, right? They realized they were losing their grip, and they're now trying to kind of coalesce a military dictatorship into this country. And I would point out, although that's concerning, and although, the IRGC are a lot more hardline, radical, and unpredictable, at the same time, you wonder if they could actually truly last in power, right? Because if we're continuing the blockade here, they don't have money. They're probably going to be the least popular with their people out of all the factions because they're the most insane, right? They don't have the same credibility as, say, the Supreme Leader did. So, these will all be things to watch. I'm not sure. So either, the best possible outcome is probably the political wing of the government prevails over the IRGC, effectively silences them. We get a deal. This thing is wrapped up immediately. Let's, by the way, hope that the CIA is pushing those guys to manage a way to, backstab or take out the IRGC. However, if the IRGC takes power, I am concerned about that. Certainly, we all should be. At the same time, though, I would argue they're not going to be as strong as you think they are, right? It's not going to be this whole thing of, the Iranian regime's going to survive another 40 years because the IRGC is in power. Look at the history of military dictatorships and military coups. They really typically do not last long. They're extremely unstable, unpopular governments that kind of, again, that house of cards begins to topple. So this will be something for sure to keep an eye on. But I would basically summarize that is the situation right now in Iran, right? It is weakness. It is chaos. It is implosion. That's why we're hearing multiple things.
Who actually has the power to make a deal right now inside of Iran? You have the negotiating team that includes the foreign minister, might not have the authority to sign off on a deal, a power grab happening right now from some IRGC leadership, including the new chief of the IRGC, Vahidi, General Vahidi, who is sort of credited as the architect of Iran's overseas terror organizations, very big hardliner. And so there seems to be, what the president's alluding to, some question about whether Iran's government has itself together, who it's comprised of and who we're dealing with on that side, who's got the authority to sign off on something. And the president seems willing to wait to resume fighting until this diplomatic option, if it's possible, can be hashed out.
Totally serious government, by the way. Remember, I was told by so many pro-Iran propagandists that the regime is intact, they're unified, we're standing strong. No, you're not. Who's even in charge of your regime? Do you know? Right? But nonetheless, there's a lot of shenanigans going on here. There's a lot of smoke. I would argue, though, the big picture behind all of it is it doesn't matter who runs Iran. It could be the IRGC, it could be the political wing of the government, it could be a power struggle between both of them. This regime still cannot survive more than a couple months with an American blockade of their oil. We've explained in the past just how important that is for their economy that's already struggling to raise money. They're people who are anxious about economic reasons. And by the way, if there's a ceasefire actively in place, it's going to be harder to blame the Americans that are not actively bombing you. Sure, you could say, oh, the embargo, the blockade or something, but has that really necessarily worked in Cuba as of late, right? At a certain point, people say, okay, why don't you make a deal? And so likely that's going to happen. And so that's the thing, is that, well, really the only choice Iran has is to figure out a way to get the U.S. to lift the blockade. Now, the political wing of the government is arguably the smartest. They're like, okay, let's make a deal. Let's figure out a way to make the Americans happy. And then let's get back to rebuilding and fixing our economy and pulling our country out of ruin effectively, right? But the IRGC is saying, no, we're going to force the Americans to stop the blockade. We're going to control the Strait ourselves. We're going to do this and that. Okay, maybe you cause some more damage to America in the process in terms of our gas prices, our economy. Sure. You cause a lot more harassment across the Gulf states, and then they don't have oil sales as much. That's all true. But I would make a strong argument for the IRGC. That's also a suicidal move. Because even if you inflict damage on a bunch of other people, you're still bringing yourself down in the end, because it's not going to actually lift the U.S. blockade. It's not going to get your oil tankers flowing. It's not going to get your money going through. Your economy is doomed in that case, right? So, I would prefer the political wing just take power, figure it out, come to us with a deal. You could argue to an extent that maybe will still happen. As a matter of fact, President Trump came out and said the following: Iran doesn't want the Strait of Hormuz closed. They want it open so they can make $500 million a day, which is therefore what they are losing if it is closed. We pointed that out. Money is everything. Follow the money, right? They only say they want it closed because I have totally blockaded it, so they merely want to save face, which, by the way, is also a possibility. We have to consider that as well. We've talked about the saving face aspect, that maybe right now Iran is simply doing what they are to make it look like they can look strong, and then a week later we'll still get a deal. Who knows? That's still a possibility, by the way. But anyways, people approached me 4 days ago saying, sir, Iran wants to open up the strait immediately, but if we do that, there can never be a deal with Iran unless we blow up the rest of their country, their leaders included. So, that's a possibility as well. But I would still argue, even with the current position that Iran is taking, the things I said just last week about Iran still remain true, right? You can take multiple options. You can take the we'll make a deal, we'll not make a deal option, but the sheer reality is their economy cannot survive a U.S. blockade. How is the IRGC, with no real supreme leader in place and no ruling credibility with the rest of the government? By the way, IRGC can't run the rest of the government. They know how to do that, right? How are they going to, via a military dictatorship, justify to their people why the lights aren't even on anymore, or there's no money flowing in the economy because they don't have oil money, right? Likewise, how is the political wing? Well, we know the political wing of the government wants to make a deal, but really those are the options there for Iran. So we'll see what happens. I would argue once again, they're just stalling and delaying the inevitable. This is not something we should freak out about too much. Said that before throughout the conflict. Some people are like, no, it's the end of the world. This is going to be World War III. And then every single time the panic ends, it just doesn't work out for them. But Nonetheless, I have a very similar stance about this, but we'll see what happens, and certainly it's going to be interesting to see who ends up winning this power struggle, but still does vindicate our argument at the end of the day, right? The Iranian government is extremely unstable. The people who tried to sell this idea that you can assassinate the entire top senior leadership of a country and they're going to unify or stand together is historically illiterate. It's just not how politics or governments work, and you're seeing that right now. And, well, we'll just see what comes at the end of it. That said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.